Good morning, everyone. Here's your Mormon news update for October 17th, 2024. The Mormon Church is now going to allow its members in warmer climates to wear what they are calling open sleeve garments, which are really just garments without sleeves. Let's call them sleeveless garments. I'm not sure how they're going to enforce them only being worn in certain areas. Apparently, they're being tested in hot climates such as Uganda, Kenya, South Africa, the Philippines, and some southern U.S. locations. I envision some sort of black market garment trade, especially for women, so they can show their shoulders even if they live in cooler climates. I lived in southern Utah for 2 years and Missouri for a year, and I would have paid a premium if I could have worn something without sleeves. Let's read some excerpts from the Salt Lake Tribune about the change. This new style could make it harder for others to judge who is or is not wearing garments, a real concern for many Latter-day Saint women. In a 2023 survey, nearly half the active members, 45%, said there is a right and wrong way to wear them, and more than half, 59%, said they felt judged for how they wear them. Along with the sleeveless garment, there is also a light one piece that they call a shift that looks like a slip, and a skirt bottom for women who mostly wear dresses, as in Africa. Church spokesperson Doug Anderson would not confirm any details about what exactly the new garments will look like, nor when they will be widely available. So what are people saying? I am thrilled to hear about the garment redesign, says Rachel Gerber, an Instagrammer with LDS Changemakers, which promotes gender equality in the church. It is, she adds, like an answer to prayers. I wonder why she didn't say it was an actual answer to prayer. Interesting. Thousands of women have complained about garment styles to the church, Gerber says. Many felt like their complaints fell on deaf ears. They were viewed as less righteous because garments did not work for them. It takes faith to confront a church policy that negatively impacts you, the California woman says. I have faith that God hears my complaints and mourns with me. Colorado Latter-day Saint Afton Southam Parker was one who spoke up. While living in Thailand with her husband and 5 children, Parker experienced firsthand what humidity and heat did to Latter-day Saint women who faithfully wore their temple garments. It was like having a damp crotch all the time, causing infections, discomfort, and distress, especially during menstruation and pregnancy, she says. It was so hard. There was nowhere to go for women to get answers about something that was required in order to be temple worthy. So after returning to the U.S., Parker contacted church headquarters in Salt Lake City and 3 years ago got an interview with the head of a garment design committee, a man, she says, who was in his 60s, who assured her that there were women on the committee. He seemed mostly concerned that women be covered and modest, she recalls him saying, to which she replied, "Why not make them easier for all body types and let women choose?" I can answer that right now. The church is constantly playing this balancing act between letting the members have enough choice that they feel empowered and limiting their choice enough that the church can still control what they do. The article goes on to say, the new version feels like some of his desires to keep women from really wearing true sleeveless clothes is affecting the design. Another inch off and it would really transform them to be more wearable with more clothes, Parker says. It has never made sense to her that the shoulders or other parts of the garment were part of the design, she says, when they weren't related to the symbolic markings. For her part, Latter-day Saint podcaster Cynthia Winward is pleased to know that leaders are listening and believes the dress option will be so much better for women's health. She wonders, though, why there can't just be a spaghetti strap top, says Winward, co-host of At Last She Said It. It still seems like they're trying to control women's clothing choices, because they are. That's exactly what they are doing. Earlier this year, one of the faith's high-level male leaders condemned what he saw as casual, even cavalier, wearing of the religious underclothing by devout members. In a speech to women in Northern California, the General Authority 70 condemned women who wear garments only on Sunday and to the temple, and the rest of the week can be seen in yoga pants. For years, the standard instruction had essentially been for women and men to wear them day and night. It still is if you read the General Handbook. According to a recent survey, however, some women were donning them when and where they want. Yes, yay, good. Keep doing that. And they didn't, it seemed, view that as disobedience or inappropriate. At the same time, it was getting tougher to find clothing, especially for women, that completely covered garments. Days after the church's general conference in April, the Utah-based faith's governing First Presidency sent a letter to all local and regional male leaders that reiterated the importance of wearing the sacred underwear as a reminder of devout members' covenant relationship with Jesus Christ and Heavenly Father. The letter also explained that one of the temple recommend questions used to determine worthiness to enter the holy edifices had been revised and another one added. The changes were subtle rather than broad, but there was a clear message. Garments are to be worn as instructed in the temple and not left to members' individual inspiration and interpretation. That's because it is about control. They cannot let the members have that much control over their own lives. This is hardly the first time the church has altered its sacred clothing. The sacred clothing has changed along with pretty much everything else in the Mormon church, including the temple ceremony. The faith surveys Latter-day Saints from time to time about garments, so fabrics and designs have evolved through the years, and they may change yet again. I do believe that the brethren are now using surveys instead of inspiration. After all, the First Presidency views the symbolism of the garment as more important than the style, according to Saints Volume 3, part of the church's official history. I wonder if they would also view the symbolism of the temple more important than the actual size of the building. They won't admit to that now because they want to claim religious persecution every time a zoning law prohibits them from building a temple of a certain size. But if it applies to garments, maybe it could also apply to temples. The existing garment pattern, which stretched to the ankles and wrists and had string ties and a collar, was ill-suited for the types of clothing worn in the 1920s, the book explains. So top church leaders instructed that a shortened and simplified garment be made available. In the future, Gerber of LDS Changemakers hopes that when leaders inevitably encounter someone with a complaint about garments, they recognize that person's faith. In discussions with women about these holy coverings, she says, the overwhelming theme has been that they feel like they are annoying their leaders when they bring up a complaint. They shouldn't, Gerber says. These are acts of courage and a desire to maintain their religious commitments, but in a physically realistic way. Amy Watkins Jensen, who directs the Instagram site Women on the Stand, appreciates all efforts by the church to understand and address the specific needs of women. This move reaffirms for Jensen, and I'm sure many, that good information can lead, she says, to good inspiration. Now let's enjoy this image that someone took while they were watching a BYU football game on TV. BYU is part of the Big 12 Conference, which is a college athletic conference headquartered in Irving, Texas. It consists of 16 full-member universities in the states of Arizona, Colorado, Florida, Iowa, Kansas, Ohio, Oklahoma, Texas, Utah, and West Virginia. Well, some zealous BYU fan made a poster that you can see in the crowd in this image. That poster sports a picture of the current Mormon Quorum of the 12 Apostles and has a heading that says, the real Big 12. The person who posted the picture said, BYU is so cringe, WTF. Next, we'll go to the Ex-Mormon subreddit for a post that says, my sister is 16 and recently left a young men, young women activity because she was offended by the activity, which was a food fight. No, I'm not joking. A few days after Helene hit, we live in Georgia. The ward thought it would be perfectly appropriate to host a food fight as the youth activity. My sister refused to participate because she found it wildly inappropriate and because she was going to the gym after and didn't want to do so covered in food. She said the leaders were bewildered and even offended that she refused to participate. Not only is a food fight just gross, the wastefulness is staggering. I was shocked that this was an actual activity endorsed by the bishop because back in my day, this idea would have been shut down, if not laughed out of the planning meeting. We might have even gotten a brief lecture on wastefulness. I could tell it really bothered my dad, who is a born and raised TBM. Anyway, that's it. I was just blown away by the entire thing, and it really made me reflect on how the church culture has changed in the decade since I was a teen. Now off to the LA Times and Mesa, Arizona. Jeremy Spilsbury never suspected that anything was off. He attended services at his local Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints ward, stayed for a meeting with the missionary committee, and then bid them farewell, including his across-the-road neighbor. But as Spilsbury pulled into his quiet residential street in this Phoenix suburb of about 511,000, he noticed the neighbor's new yard sign, CUCKS for Harris. Spilsbury did a double take. Then he Googled the offending word. According to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, it is often used as an insulting and contemptuous term for a man who has politically progressive or moderate views. The word has sexual connotations too, meaning a man whose female partner is unfaithful. When I found out what it meant, I was kind of appalled because it's obviously designed to be as offensive as possible, said Spilsbury, who had a Republicans for Harris Walls sign in his own yard. The neighbor's sign, while biting, underscored an emerging reality reality in Arizona's sizable Latter-day Saint community, that while church members are overwhelming Republican, there is some erosion in their traditionally airtight support for Republicans. I think this is tied to the article I read about garments. The church is losing control of its members, and it's amazing. There has been a long-standing belief from people who have not been LDS that Mormons are homogenous in their beliefs and their voting and the way they enact living their faith, said Brittany Romanello, a cultural anthropologist at Arizona State University who has studied Mormon identity and was raised in the church. Mormons were the most Republican-leaning religious group in the country, the Pew Research Center found in 2016. But the politics and willingness to openly disagree with one another in these LDS spaces is becoming more and more apparent, Romanello said. The budding Latter-day Saint groups for Harris are an aberration, said Tara Rowland, the neighbor with the offensive sign. They do not represent the majority, she said. There's these few people in our congregation who everybody knows is full of it. The church takes pains to keep its official position apolitical, and last weekend, one of its senior leaders, Dallin A. Jokes, encouraged members to be civil ahead of the November election, which is something that Tara Rowland has obviously ignored. As a true believing member, I never would have dared to ignore something that one of the top leaders said. Despite its pledge to neutrality, the church has waded into issues it considers moral, supporting conservative views on issues such as abortion and LGBTQ+ rights. Although Trump says stupid, clownish things and he's a buffoon, Rowland said he's the best choice of the two. I believe that family and religion and God and the sanctity of life is important, and Trump is the most in line with our values, Rowland said, adding about her neighbors, if they were voting their values, they would not be voting for Harris Walls. For most of their lives, Jeremy and Julie Spilsbury were in step with their church's political culture. They avidly listened to conservative talk show hosts Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity. They voted Republican, including for Trump. But things started to change around 2020. He always jokes it's because of Trump that we've changed a lot of our thinking politically and religiously, Julie Spilsbury said of her husband. It's actually been a good thing for us in our personal growth. In 2020, Jeremy Spilsbury was serving as a bishop of his ward, a volunteer role in addition to his job running a small arborist business. When one of his employees assumed he was voting for Trump again, Spilsbury knew he didn't want to keep quiet. He typed up what would become the first of several Facebook posts alerting his community to his new political views. The backlash was almost immediate. Though few people confronted him in person, Spilsbury said he heard that many thought he had been deceived. Rowland said he caused such a division between our congregation. Congregants asked for him to be released as bishop. His term expired in 2021. But he was committed to his increasing outspokenness. Soon he quit his job to go back to school and study peace and conflict. He refused to leave the church or Mesa. To use a religious term, I'm a wolf in sheep's clothing, Spilsbury said. There's no one more dangerous than an insider pretending to be part of the group. Then Julie Spilsbury was elected to the Mesa City Council, and a few months later, her first controversial issue reached the agenda, an ordinance prohibiting discrimination in public accommodations, employment, and housing. The ordinance caused consternation across Mesa, home of the state's first Latter-day Saints temple and a concentrated Mormon community in Arizona. A local representative of the church weighed in, signing a letter along with other interfaith leaders and Senator Kristen Sinema, an independent from Arizona, in support of the ordinance. But others, including Rowland, spoke against it at city council meetings. Say a baker doesn't want to make a cake for a transgender wedding or something like that, Rowland said in an interview. They should have the ability. That's their business. A lot of LDS people thought you're doing something that's contrary to our religious beliefs, when in fact that was 100% not true, said Mesa Mayor John Giles, a Republican and church member. The LDS church leadership is actually far more progressive than a lot of these traditional kind of fundamentalist people in the church. And they just kind of refuse to acknowledge that they're out of step with where the church is. The ordinance ultimately passed, and an attempt to put the issue to voters as a referendum was dropped. It's something I'm very proud of, but I have a lot of people who hate me now because of it, said Julie Spilsbury as she flashed her phone's lock screen featuring a bright neon-colored rainbow flag. I was just amazed by how wonderful these people were, you know, Jeremy Spilsbury said of the LGBTQ+ community. I had all these preconceived notions growing up in the church. They're perceived as a threat, you know, their lifestyles. When Harris became the Democratic presidential nominee, a smattering of identity-based affinity groups burst into being, including the Latter-day Saints committees. The Spilsbury's Republicans for Harris Walls sign was too much for Rowland, and the offensive sign went up. Jeremy Spilsbury shot off a text to his neighbors. Hey, I'd love to come over and talk to you tomorrow about the sign that you have in the front yard. Is there a time that works for you? The next day, Spilsbury found himself sitting on a couch across from Tara Rowland and her husband, who could not be reached for comment for this article. Spilsbury said he asked asked them to take the sign down. For the sake of the relationship that we have as neighbors and at church, this isn't good, Spilsbury recalled, saying, "This doesn't help our relationship, and I'd hope that that would be more important to you. Yeah, unity is really important to me as well, but sometimes Christ goes into the temple and turns over the tables of the money changers. It's not always kumbaya," Rowland told a Times reporter. She said she just wanted a simple answer. What was Spilsbury's problem with Trump? You can't vote for somebody just because you hate somebody else, and voting for someone because of your hatred for someone else, that's not unity either. That's Satan. Spilsbury said later that he hadn't intended to debate which candidate was stronger. He wanted to know why his fellow church member would post a sign so blatantly insulting. The neighbors argued back and forth and voices were raised, Spilsbury said. After about 45 minutes, he walked home. The Rowland sign stayed put, along with a Trump banner and an upside-down American flag. And today we will finish with this wise advice from Who Am I and What Do I Say? Friendly reminder that folks who left your church won't hear the stuff you've been talking about them, but the ones quietly deconstructing while still in your congregation will. And it's not having the effect that you think it is. And that's your update for today, folks. I absolutely hope you have the day that you deserve.